In this video, I'm going to show you how we can automate the creation of PowerPoint presentations, just like this one here. There's this cool package in Python called pptx that allows us to create or read in PowerPoints and modify them within our Python scripts. So we can add text, we can add images, plots, tables, whatever, just using our Python code. Let me start by showing you the example that I made in more depth. Okay, so the idea with this PowerPoint is that we're going to supply a UniProt ID, which is a unique ID given to a protein listed in the UniProt database, and it's going to create this PowerPoint for us with information about that protein. So let's just go through an example. We have this UniProt ID here, 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵𝗁, which is the ID for a specific protein, and then the PowerPoint itself is then populated with information about that protein. So you can see here on the first page, it's a summary page. We have the gene that encodes for the protein, we have the ensemble ID, the actual UniProt ID, and then the sequence family. On the third slide, we have the function, so the function of the protein. The next slide, we have protein and RNA expression. So these are two plots I've created using matplotlib in Python, which is a standard data visualization library, and I've just added them onto the slide here. And then the final slide, we just have the protein sequence and some information about the protein sequence. So let's now say we wanted to create the same PowerPoint but for a different protein, so a different UniProt ID. How do we do that? Well, I built this as a command line tool, so we need to go to the command line and then call our script with a UniProt ID, protein ID, and it will just create this PowerPoint for whatever UniProt ID we supply. So let's do a demonstration of that now. So we're on the command line now, and we have this file called gene.py, which is a command line Python script that's going to create the PowerPoint for us. So we're going to call this file with a UniProt ID, so a protein ID, and then it's hopefully going to create that PowerPoint for us and populate it with information about that protein. And just so you can see the PowerPoints created, I'm just going to open this PowerPoints folder, so you should automatically see it populate in this folder when we create it. So I'm going to run python gene.py, and then I'm going to supply the UniProt ID, in this case, which is going to be P00533. I'm going to run that. As you can see, that's ran, and a PowerPoint has just appeared, a new PowerPoint has just appeared in this folder here. So if we just open that up, what we see is this PowerPoint which has been created, which just looks just like the other one that we saw. So I'll just quickly flick through these pages. So this protein is encoded for by the EGFR gene. We've got obviously the same information as we've seen previously. We've got the function, we have the protein and RNA expression, and then also the protein sequence. So as you can see, in a matter of seconds, we've just populated this PowerPoint with information about this specific protein. And as you can probably imagine, this is going to be very useful for those of you who need to create PowerPoint presentations often, let's say with company updates or with general weekly reports that you need to produce. This can speed up that process for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take you through how I created this PowerPoint automation. So there are different ways you can do it, but I'm just going to show you the way I did it, and you can either follow along or just apply this to your own presentation. So the first step I took is to create a template PowerPoint. This is a presentation that's going to act as a starting point, and our data is going to be populated into this PowerPoint. So let me show you what my template PowerPoint looks like. Okay, so this is our template PowerPoint, very similar to the two you've already seen, but there's no information populated in these PowerPoints, but let's just go through it. So we've got the gene, and then we've got, as you can see, placeholders for where our actual data is going to go. So yeah, placeholders for everything. Same for the function slide. There's no images, no plots in our expression slide, and then again the sequence, just a placeholder where that sequence may go. So that's the first step. You're going to create that template PowerPoint where your data is going to go. I created mine in Canva, so it's like a website I use for design, so I use it a lot for like thumbnails on my YouTube channel. But you can just create it in PowerPoint as you normally would, maybe using your company letterheads or company styling. And then the rest of the process is going to be in Python. So we're going to first read in that template into Python and also any command line arguments. So if you remember, we used a UniProt ID, protein ID as a command line argument. And then for each slide, we're going to collect the data that we want to put on that slide.
So this could be using APIs to pull information. It could be potentially using your own data that you have locally. Whatever method, we're going to collect the data that we want to put on the slide, and then using the pptx library, we're going to update that slide with that information that we've collected. So we do that for each slide, and then at the end we just save the presentation. So it's quite a simple workflow. We create the template, and then we read it into Python and kind of update it with information. Alright, so I'm now going to show you the basics of this pptx library and just show you how you can read in presentations and how you can do some basic commands. Okay, so I'm back in VS Code now, and the first thing you want to do is install the pptx library. So I've already installed it, but you would just do pip install pptx like that. And once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and create a Python file. I've already created one here, but I'm going to create another one called tutorial, just so we can walk through it together. Okay, so at the top here, we're going to import the pptx library. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a presentation object. Okay, so we're going to do this by reading in the template PowerPoint we've created. So for me, that's this input.pptx here. I'm basically going to say presentation equals pptx.presentation with a capital P, and then you just want to have the path to your PowerPoint here. For me, I'm going to import another package, which is OS, and here I'm going to put os.path.join. Here I'm just basically linking to that input.pptx file within the PowerPoints folder, so that's all this is doing here. And I'm actually just going to open a Python terminal in the bottom, and so we can run this code on the fly. So if I run these lines, as you can see, no errors. If I look at presentation, as you can see, it's the presentation object. So now what I'm going to show you is how to list the text boxes that are on a slide, because when we update our PowerPoint with information, we're effectively changing placeholder text to our own data. So I'm going to show you a function which is going to list all the text boxes on a certain slide. Okay, so here's that function. It takes two parameters, the presentation object and the slide number. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this function, and then we're going to call this function on our presentation. So I'm going to say list text boxes, presentation, and let's just say slide number 1. And what we can see is just printed this list for us. And if I now bring up the template again, what we can see is that we have two text boxes on here. We have Gene and 𝗖cie Informatics. Okay, so that's what these two are, Gene and 𝗖cie Informatics. We actually do have this third, but it's grouped with this image, and so it's not appearing as a text box in the code. That's okay. We don't want to change that. Now let's do the same for the second slide. So here's our second slide. Let's list the text boxes here. We just change the 1 to a 2. And what you can see is that we have all these different text boxes. So it's going to be the same for the other ones as well. Now, one thing I should have said before actually is that you want to have a separate text box for every single piece of data. So normally, I guess when you're creating a PowerPoint, you might have everything in one text box. So for example, here you might have the title of the box and all the information in a single text box. But here you want to make sure that everything has its own text box, because we're going to update individual, text boxes with the data. So I actually have some more code, which is it's basically going to loop through the text boxes on a page, and it's going to assign an ID to the text box. Let me just show you what this code does. So we're calling our list text boxes function with a random slide. So if we just do the first slide again, and if we run this, what we can see is text box 1 Gene, text box 2 𝗖cie Informatics. So it's just it's a nicer way of viewing it compared to this, just a plain list. Especially when we have slides that have maybe 10, 20 text boxes on. Having a long list, it's going to be hard to count the index of the thing. So let's just do one more example. We'll do a slide that has a lot of text boxes. For example, this one, slide 2. If we do 2 here, run that, we see that every piece of data has its own text box ID, and this is going to be used later on because when we replace the text in a text box with our own data, the way we query that text box is through its ID or number. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to update the data in our slides. So if you remember from our diagram, the first step was to create the template, which we've done. The second step was to read it into Python and also command line arguments. We've read the template into Python already. For now, we're going to leave out the command line arguments for now, and I'm just going to hard code that UniProt ID in. So I'm just going to say UniProt ID. I'm just going to hard code it in as a string, the same one we had at the start. So 𝗄𝗶𝘁_007. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try and update the text on the first slide. So all we're going to do is update this word gene to the UniProt ID. Okay, so this should actually say protein because it's the protein ID, but it's just a placeholder text, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, we're going to replace this word with that UniProt ID, which we've just hard coded into our code. For the sake of clarity, let's just relist the text boxes on the first slide. So we've got text box 1, which is gene, text box 2, which is informatics. We want to replace the first text box. Okay, so the text box with ID 1, and I've already created a function that can do that for us. So this function, which I'm going to paste just here, it's quite large, so you can just zoom out a little bit. This is going to update the text in a text box for us, and it takes 4 arguments. The first is the presentation object, the second is the slide number, the third is the text box ID, so that links to these text box IDs, numbers down here, and then finally, what text do we want to put onto the slide? What text do we want to replace that placeholder with? Okay, so let's run this. I'm going to come down here. Presentation is, we called it presentation. The slide number is slide number 1. Text box ID we get from down here, which is text box ID 1. And the new text which we want to replace is UniProt ID. Okay, so it's just that string that we've hard coded there. So if I run this now, okay, we haven't actually run the function yet, so let's run the function first and then rerun it. UniProt ID is not defined, bloody hell. So let's do that and then rerun it. There we go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to save it and see what that's done. So to save it, basically going to do presentation.save, right, and then the path, the path to the file. So I'm just assigning to UniProt ID plus target report. So if we run these now, we should see a PowerPoint appear just in this side menu here. So just watch out for that. And yeah, there we go. So that target has now appeared in this folder. And if we open that PowerPoint, what we see is that first slide has now updated to have our UniProt ID there. Okay. And you'll see all the other slides, they're still placeholders in the other slides because we've only done the first slide so far. So now what we're going to do is basically do the exact same thing, but for all the other slides. So collect the data for the slide and then update the slide with the data, and then save the presentation at the end once we've updated all the slides. So I'm going to talk through how I pull this information. So I do this using various APIs, using the requests library in Python, but obviously if you're using it for a different scenario, the way you collect your data is going to be different. Okay, so our next task is this second slide here. So I'm going to show you how I get this information. Obviously, as I said, this might not be relevant to you, but it might be cool just to see how different ways you can retrieve information from your Python code. So back to VS Code, I'm just going to import some of the other libraries that I am going to use specifically. So you might not need any of these. That's okay. You just import whatever you need. So I'm just going to load all these. Tell you what, let's add some comments in here so we can kind of keep track on what slide we're on. So that was slide 1. Now for slide 2. So I've created this function here, retrieve data, which uses an API endpoint and a gene ID, and then fetches data for us, which we can format in a JSON. Okay, so 𝘂 KB, which is what this API endpoint points to, it's a protein sequence and functional information database. So this is going to give us all the information we need to populate that second slide. Okay, so I'm going to call this function now. The API endpoint I'm going to use is this endpoint here. And then the gene ID, that's going to be our 𝘂 ID, which we hard coded in up here. Okay, so if I run that, as well as this, if I then print this variable, what we see is there's a ton of information here, which is returned as a JSON for us. So if you remember, this function returns a response as a JSON, and there's a bunch of information here, and our kind of goal is to sift through this and pull out the information that we need to populate our slide. Okay, so as you can see here at the bottom, actually there's our protein sequence. So our goal is, one of our goals is this is actually the last slide of the PowerPoint, if you remember. This is this slide here. This is where our sequence goes. But yeah, that's the plan. All the information we need is going to be somewhere in this big, vast flow of data. Okay, so we're gonna sift through it and try and parse out what we need. Now, what I'd recommend if you're doing something similar to this and you're returning it as a JSON, is to actually save it to a JSON file. And especially in a text editor like VS Code, if you open a JSON file, it will kind of format it in a very readable way. Because obviously this is ridiculous. Imagine trying to kind of parse the right information out of this. It's going to be really hard. But if you open a JSON file in a text editor, it's actually quite easy to see the kind of levels. So the first thing we're going to do actually is get the gene name. Okay, so we have the 𝘂 ID, which is the protein ID. From this 𝘂 data, which we've just created, we want to find information about the gene that codes for that protein. Okay, so I've already figured out where in the JSON hierarchy the gene name is, and I'm just going to paste it here, so that's to save time. And it should give us our gene name, which in this case there is LRRK2. Okay, so that is going to go on our second slide here in the Hugo gene name text. Okay, and now to get the longer gene name, we do something very similar, which is this here. Okay, so again, just know for this, we're basically looping through this JSON structure and pulling out the information that we need. So if I run this, and then we see what's inside that variable, we can see 𝘂cy repeat kinase 2. So that's what's going to go in this first box here, the Hugo gene name and the longer gene name. Now let's get the ensemble ID. So it's the same thing for the ensemble ID. We're basically crawling through our 𝘂 data, which is this big JSON, and we're trying to find that ensemble ID information in there, which I've already done. So if we run that, see what's inside of that variable. There we go, there's our ensemble ID. In fact, I just put a 0 on the end there to pull out the first value. There we go, and that's going to go in that box. Next we have the 𝘂 ID, the kind of input, that's the command line argument, but for now we've just hard coded it. So the only other thing we need is the sequence family. And same story with this, I've already gone ahead and found where that information is in our 𝘂 data. So if I run this, we can see sequence similarity. There we go, belongs to the protein kinase superfamily. And I guess I should also pull out the first value here, so I'll just add a 0 on the end. Let's rerun that. There we go. So at this point, what we've done is we've collected all the information that's going to replace all these placeholders. However, there's another step we have to do, which is actually update the slide with that data. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. And if I just go back to earlier where we had, this way of listing the text boxes and the text box IDs, I'm just going to run that again, but this time for slide 2. So if I just clear this terminal, what we can see is that's all the elements that are on the slide, and it's just got the text box IDs with them. And now we're going to use our update text of text box function to basically replace the placeholders with the information that we just collected. So I'm just going to come down here, and we're going to run this function many times. Okay, we actually need to run it. How many times do we need to run it? We need it 1, 2, 3. We need it 5 times. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate it, right, like so. Okay, right, now the first one we're going to update is the Hugo gene name. So that is presentation. The slide number is going to be the same for all of them, so I'll just edit these to slide number 2. Okay, now the text box for the Hugo gene name, if you can see, it's Hugo gene name text. Okay, so you're looking for the text in our little mapping down here, which is here, and that's related to text box 5. Okay, so I'm going to put the 5 in the text box ID, and then the new text is going to be the gene name variable. Okay, like so. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other 4 text boxes. Okay, so I've gone ahead and just updated all those text boxes with the related information. So if we run all these now, and then if we go ahead and save it, let's just save it to a different name. Let's just say you know, just some junk name like that, just so we can tell it apart. There we go, it's that one. So if I open this, what we can see is that we've now updated both the first slide and the second slide. Okay, so obviously the remainder of the slides still have their placeholders, but hopefully you're getting the idea now. We're basically going slide by slide, collecting the information that we want to put on the slide, and then updating the slide and saving the presentation. Okay, now slide 3 is very similar to slide 2, so I'm going to kind of speed through this, and then I guess for slide 4, that's going to have our plots, which might be, might be worth just taking a bit more time to go over that. But again, I think slide 5 as well is also very similar to what we've just done. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll quickly go over slide 3 and 5. Same exact thing. We're just pulling information from our UniProt data API response. Okay, so I'm just going to put slide 3 here, and we'll do slide 5 alongside after slide 3. So actually what I'm going to do is I'll paste the code in here and then just explain it to you. Okay, so for slide 3, I've just defined this function which is going to allow us to get the gene summary of the gene, and that's using the 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵 Python package. So the 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵 Python package, which is being imported here from Bioconductor, that basically allows us to interact with certain biological databases through our Python code. So it's very handy. And all we're doing with this function is we're getting the function of a gene using that UniProt ID. The NCBI ID. So I actually need to add one more line here, which is getting us the NCBI ID from our UniProt API response. So if we just run all this, and then if we look at the function summary value, there we have a nice description or the function of the protein. And then as we've seen previously, we're going to use this update text box function to update slide 3 text box 2 with that value. You'll have to just trust me that it's in text box 2. That's the text box ID. So if we run that now, and then for slide 5, what we do is very similar. Getting the protein sequence, the sequence length, and the molecular weight. That's from our UniProt data, which is our API response, this thing here. And then again, updating those text boxes with the data. Okay, so I'm just going to run all that. And if we did go ahead and save this, we would see that all the slides have been populated apart from the 4th slide. Okay, so as you can see here, the protein sequence, the length, the molecular weight, as well as the function of our protein. Now the only thing left to do is populate this slide with the plots. Okay, so we're going to look at the expression of the protein and also the RNA expression in different human tissues. Okay, so let me just go over the theory behind this, because the theory is relatively simple. You create a plot like you normally would. So I'm going to use matplotlib, which is a very common library in Python for creating plots. And then I'm going to save these plots with a .png extension, and then the Python pptx library has a way of adding pictures or images to slides. It has a built-in function to do that called add picture. Okay, so what you can do is you give the dimensions or like the Cartesian coordinates of where you want the image to go on the page, and it might take a bit of playing around with to get it right. But you basically supply the file path to your image and then supply these coordinates, and it will just paste the image on the page. So in theory, that's quite simple. The only thing is that for this example, I'm pulling information about gene expression from a GraphQL database on the internet, and I'm then formatting that, into a pandas data frame, then creating the plots and adding them to the slides. There's quite a few steps which I've done here, but I think what I'll do is I'll just paste the code and then talk through it slowly, so hopefully you can understand what's going on. Right, so let's go over at a high level what this code does. I'm just going to minimize this terminal for now. But the first thing we're doing is we're building a query string. Now, I'm not going to go over in too much depth like what this query string is, but it's basically, there's this website called Open Targets which contains information about protein and RNA expression, and they have an API which allows you to query their GraphQL database. So that's all I'm doing here, is I'm creating a query string as follows, and then I'm putting the ensemble ID of our gene inside that query here. And then all this code is doing up to here is, calling the API. So we're making a post request to the API, getting the response, and then here we're passing the response into a data frame. Okay, so this is a pandas data frame. We loaded pandas in at the start as PD here. So we're loading that into the data frame, formatting it again. So we're extracting a relevant information, which in our case is the RNA and protein expression in different tissues. Then I can actually remove some of these. So we've got our data frame. In fact, let's run it up to here so you can see what's going on. It might be a bit clearer. If we run our query string and the API request, if we now print df, so our data frame, what we can see is we've got RNA expression, protein level in different tissues. Okay, so that's what we have, and then we're going to plot some graphs of this. So we're going to plot two graphs, one of RNA expression, one of the protein level, and then we're going to put those onto our presentation. Okay, because there's a lot of tissues here, I'm actually extracting the top 10 tissues for both the protein and RNA, so the graphs aren't going to be too small that we can't actually see the axis labels or anything. So that's what these lines are doing. They're just filtering the data again, and then we're plotting the data. So matplotlib is, as I mentioned, a very standard package for creating plots. We're creating two bar plots, and we can set the axis labels, and we can do styling, colors, whatever else. You can kind of modify this as you like. So if I run that, and what you'll also see actually quickly is that both of these images are being saved to the Scratch folder. So if I just look on the left hand side, in the Scratch folder we now have protein plot and RNA plot, and as you can see, those are the plots that we're going to put onto our presentation. Okay, now I've got a function which I'm just going to add in here. Actually, it's called add image to slide. So it takes the slide number, the image path, so that's the file path of those images we just saved, and then these aren't Cartesian coordinates, these are actually measurements in inches. Okay, so how far from the left hand side from the top, what's the width in inches, the height in inches, those are the measurements. And then the PPTX library, a slide object has an attribute called add picture, which then does exactly the same thing basically. So these final two lines here, add image to slide, we're calling that function. We're setting the slide, because it's zero-based indexing in Python. This is actually slide 4, so index 3 is slide 4. We're setting the path to our plot, and then we're setting the different we're setting the positioning with these inches measurements. I'm actually loading in a library called inches. So as you'll see, this is a part of the PPTX util library. But yeah, that allows us to set the measurements, and you'll probably have to play around with these measurements to get it where you want on the page. But you can just iterate on that. Trial and error is how I did it. And so yeah, we do that for both of our plots. We add them to slide 4, and then finally, if we save it again, I'm just going to set this as final. Run that. You should see the presentation appear, and if we open it, we see, hopefully, we go to slide 4, those plots have now been added to the slide. Okay, let's quickly look at this alongside the measurements. Okay, because I can't remember how many inches across it is, but okay, for the RNA, which is the left hand side is a protein, and that is 3 inches from the top. Okay, so 3 inches from the top and 6 inches in height. So from the top to the bottom of the image is obviously 9 inches, and that's probably another couple inches at the bottom. But if we look at the protein, the left hand side is 1 inch. Okay, so that's 1 inch here on the left hand side. But yeah, you obviously just play around with it to get those to fit as you like. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, to summarize, this is the process we've done. So we've created the template, we've read it into Python, collected the data, updated the slide, and then saved the presentation. But I'm just realizing now we haven't actually finished, because at the minute we're hard coding the UniProt ID into our code. Let's now turn this into a command line script, so we can supply the UniProt ID on the command line and then automatically, you know, run the script just supplying the argument on the command line without having to actually interact with the code. Okay, so what you'll notice is I've already loaded in the sys package. The sys package allows us to read command line arguments, and where I've hard coded this UniProt ID in, I'm going to replace it with this command here. Okay, so sys.argv1 takes the first command line argument that we supply, right? And what I'm also going to do at the bottom is add some code that's going to print a message to the terminal to, you know, just to confirm that it's received the arguments. Okay, so def main, and it's checking if we've supplied an argument. If so, it says argument received, else no arguments provided. Okay, and if name equals main, it's saying if we're running this as a script instead of importing it as a module, it will execute this code. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and I'm just going to get rid of all these points here. And now let's test this out. So on the command line here, I'm going to get out of Python. I'm in this folder. If we just list the contents here, we can see we've got this tutorial py. So that's our command line script here that we're going to call. Maybe I'll just zoom in a bit and we can see this a bit better. Okay, so we're in the terminal area now. We're basically going to do Python tutorial.py, and then we're going to supply a UniProt ID. Okay, and for this example, I'm going to use the UniProt ID for the protein P53, which I believe is P 𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵. And if we run that, and what you'll see is that it actually like prints out a load of text to the screen, and I forgot to comment out the bit of code, I think, where we listed the text box IDs. Where was that? Here. So we could have commented this out, and then you can like hide the warnings as well, so there's not a bunch of stuff printed to the terminal. But in any case, what you'd see is that in the left hand side here, we have this new file that's been created, this new PowerPoint slide deck. You should probably change the name. You don't want like the final, that's something else you can do. But in any case, let's take a look at the final result. I'm hoping that everything worked perfectly. Okay, so there we go. First slide looks okay. Second slide looks good. So we've got the official gene name. We have the UniProt ID, ensemble ID, and then belongs to the P53 family. The function, okay, one thing I'm noticing is that it seems to be cutting off a little bit. So another thing you can do with the pptx library is to change the font size. You can actually manipulate other things about text. For example, you know, you can make text bold, underlined, or, you know, basic things like that. But you could add, say, a simple if statement that checks the size of the string that's going to go in the text box, and if it's, you know, bigger than a certain amount, then you reduce the font size, which would be a good addition here. As we can see, it's cutting off a little bit. So, you know, just so we can see it, if I reduce the font size by 1. But then let's just carry on. So the fourth slide seems to be working. We see RNA expression is up in the tonsils. Protein expression is up in the oral mucosa, the rectum and placenta, colon, etc. And then the protein sequence as well. Again, you could change the font size if it's quite small. It's another thing you could do just with an if statement. That's basically it. We've created this PowerPoint. We've populated this PowerPoint with information in a matter of seconds. Okay. So as I mentioned at the start, like if you're in a job that requires you to produce maybe a weekly report, or something where you're having to quite often show the same results, which I imagine is quite common. No, not just in bioinformatics, but in any kind of job. Maybe it's presenting internal sales figures for the week, or whatever it is. This could be a cool way, fun way, just to automate that, make your life easier. But yeah, my point is, this is a great way for automating PowerPoint, and there's so much more you can do. So here's just some of the things which they mention on their website, but populating text with placeholders, which we did, adding images to the slide, which we did, adding text box to the slide. We didn't add any text boxes, but we did, replace the text in the text boxes that were already there. Another thing is adding charts, so column charts, bar charts, line charts, and pie charts, and so on. I guess what we did is we saved our bar charts to an image, and then just added the image. But I guess you can do it either way. You can change the document properties, you can add tables, add shapes, add hyperlinks to the text, and many other things. There's many other things that you can do with this library. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found that informative. If you did, do leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.